Now, soul winning, if I can get over to my notes here. It's up there somewhere. There we go. All right. Soul winning is one of the methods we use for reaching out to people. Church planting is another. Mission work is another. They're all great works, and they're all a part of trying to reach souls for Christ. I'm sure many of you, if not most of you, have had a Bible study with someone. I don't know how many I've been on, probably, well, I know it's hundreds, but at least. And we've been a part of starting 7 congregations so far. So I know a little bit about it, but it's not easy. Never built a church building, by the way. I've helped build a church building, but I've never been a part of the deciding on that. It's never been a part of something I really even wanted to do, to be honest with you. But, Lord leads you in directions you're not aware He wants you to go. But about this church planting and doing this kind of work, it's not easy. I like the story of John Getty. In the 1840s, he left his church in Canada, where he was preaching, with his wife and his 2 small children to go to the South Sea Islands to do mission work. The voyage at that time, because the way things were in the 1840s, he had to travel 20,000 miles to get where he was going. That's a long way, right? I mean, you can't just go in straight lines like now. You just fly. You couldn't do that then. And he was going to the New Hebrides Islands, and the particular island, I'm not sure I can pronounce it, I think it's pronounced Antietam, but I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. The problem with Antietam was it was filled with cannibals at the time. In fact, only a month or 2 before, the British ship had landed there, and over 20 men had been killed and eaten. So when I say they were cannibals, I'm not making that up. They killed them and ate them. When he got there, there was a lot of difficulties, as you can imagine. There was no written form of language. That's a huge barrier to translating the Bible into somebody's language. There was also the constant threat of being killed and eaten. And for a long time, there were really no converts at all. And even when there were converts, it was coming very slow. But over time, more and more began to receive the gospel. And he was able to translate the entire Bible into their native language. So I guess he developed even the words and the letters for their language. And he ended up planting 25 churches in that small area of the world. He labored with little or no help. There's almost no word from back in America. But in the pulpit of the church where he primarily preached there for many years, there's a plaque. And this is what it says. When he landed in 1848, there was no Christians here. And when he left in 1872, there were no heathen. Not a bad epitaph, I think. John 14, verse 12 says, "Most assuredly I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these he will do." Now, a lot of people think that's not even possible, but I believe that it is very possible to do greater works than Jesus did. And I think that's been done, by the way, many times, actually. But it's not easy to do better than he did on certain things, but he had a very focused ministry, and so he couldn't do some of the things that we can do today. And the outreach methods we have today are in many ways superior to the ones they had. There were and there are many barriers prospects alone face in being reached by some soul winner. For one thing, lethargy. Why would they want to study with somebody? Another one's indifference, couldn't care less. Another one's delay, oh yeah, I'll study with you later, but not now. Another one would be unbelief. They just don't believe any of the things you're talking about. There is such a thing. We know we talk about spiritual security. There's a carnal security, feeling safe the way you are, not wanting to rock the boat. There is despair and depression. People who have despair or depression are harder to reach in some ways because they're so wound up in their own problems. There's love for sin or love for certain types of addictions that make people not really want to change. There's self-righteousness. There are people who don't go to church anywhere, who aren't religious at all, but think that they're better than everybody that goes to church. So if you think that self-righteousness only goes to church, you're sadly mistaken. That is not the case. There's the lack of time, people who are too busy in life, particularly in work. A lot of people, though, just recreation. They don't go to church on Sunday because it's their only day off, and that's when they recreate. And then there's business and financial worries. A lot of people work all the time because they're worried about their business, just trying to keep it going. And so those things kind of get in the way of doing soul winning with them. This is an interesting thing to me. This is Jesus also had to cross over and overcome many barriers, and even in his soul winning. For example, he crossed racial barriers. John 4 and verse 9, the lady that he's talking to is a Samaritan, and the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. They wouldn't even talk to each other, and he's having a study with her on that the edge of that well in Sychar. And also he had to cross moral barriers. In verses 16 through 19, this woman had been married 5 times, and now she's living with somebody that she's not even married to. And then Jesus had to cross religious barriers. John 4:20 indicates that they worship there on Mount Gerizim and not in Jerusalem. And so that's obviously a different thing, and neither one would worship at the other. And Jesus also crossed cultural barriers. In John 4 and verse 27, it was inappropriate for a man to talk to a woman in public, and he did that. And he was talking to a woman. Some women wish that was still the case, I suppose. But that's a lot of barriers to cross that he managed to cross. And we seem, in my experience, we seem to struggle with being able to reach anybody that doesn't get into our building. Do you know what I mean? If they come here, yeah, we'll talk to them and we'll have a study with them. But generating a study outside of this building and conducting it out there is not something you see a lot of people doing. Christopher Searcy, I think that's the way you pronounce it, S-E-R-C-Y-E, you tell me. Christopher Searcy was playing basketball with his friends on May the 16th, 1998, when he got shot. He was shot in the chest. The bullet perforated his aorta. His friends did the best they could, the guys that were playing basketball with him, grabbed him up, they didn't have a car, started dragging him toward the Ravenwood Hospital and trying to keep him from bleeding. They got within about 40 feet of the hospital and they were absolutely wiped out. They couldn't go any further, so they ran in to ask help inside the hospital. And the staff refused at that point because there was some kind of insurance thing about the people had to come inside the hospital to get help. And so they refused, but a police officer heard what was going on, so he grabbed a wheelchair and went out 40 feet, got Christopher, put him in the wheelchair, brought him in the hospital, and they worked with him for about an hour, and he died. It was too late. Had they got him earlier, he might have survived, but he did not survive. It seems that the thing that caused his life was that they wouldn't deal with him because he wasn't in their building. And it seems to me that churches are often surrounded by people who are needing the gospel of Christ. And it's just sad that we are so narrow-minded that we wouldn't go outside our door to try to reach somebody, and bring them in, that we wait for them to walk inside of our building before we'll even potentially talk to them about coming to church regular or being a Christian. Don't you think that's kind of not the right way to go about that? I mean, you're shocked about the hospital staff that wouldn't go 40 feet, but what's different, right? I want to talk to you, though. We have a lengthy text tonight, but don't worry, we're not going to read all that, okay? You need to relax a little bit. I don't want to scare you to death. I want to just look at 5 barriers. I'll try not to take too long on this. 5 barriers that I think sometimes you might miss. One is stressful services. What I'm talking about here, look, if you're with me in Mark, we're going to kind of spot read. Maybe you can read with me. Mark 1 and verse 1 says, "And again, he," that is Jesus, "began to teach by the sea, and a great multitude was gathered to him, so that he got into a boat and sat in it on the sea, and the whole multitude was on the land facing the sea." Right? So he's teaching. So what you read in the rest of this text is him teaching, and he's teaching parables, right? Now drop down to verse 33, which is where Logan began a minute ago. "And with many such parables he spoke the word to them as they were able to hear it." So what you read up above that is not all he taught. You see that? So he taught that much, and then he taught many such parables. You get that? That's important to get. And then verse 34, "But without a parable he did not speak to them. And when they were alone," so he didn't stop teaching after he got out of the crowd. So he taught the crowd for, looks like hours. And then after he got out of the crowd, he goes in and he explains all things to his disciples. And now it's later in the day. Now verse 35, "On the same day." So this has been a long day of teaching, reaching out to people, and then reaching out even to his apostles. "And on the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side. I'm not through working.'" Now that's interesting. In Mark 3 and verse 20, "The multitude came together so that they could not so much as eat bread." Jesus was used to being so busy teaching and working with the people that there were times when he had to skip lunch, I guess, whatever they'd call it. Mark 6 and verse 31 says, "And he said to them, 'Come aside by yourself to a deserted place and rest a while.'" He's talking to the apostles. "For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat." And when you cannot stop to even eat, you're busy, right? We've all been that busy. That's pretty busy. But that's 2 days that we see that. In Matthew 8 and verse 20 it says, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." So Jesus had a hard time even finding a good place to lay down at night. That's the reason he often even slept in the clothes that they had. In fact, their clothes were designed to be like camping gear almost. And Mark 4 and verse 38 says, "He was in the stern asleep on a pillow." That's in our text here. That's why he was asleep. Do you understand now why he's asleep? The rest of the people have been sitting there listening. That's hard. I know it's hard, right? Don't amen it. But it's hard to listen, right? You should try teaching. It's wear you out. And so he had been teaching all day long, and he'd been working with these people, and now he's asleep on a pillow. Let me suggest to you that stressful service or services can really hinder a lot of evangelism. If you get little help, you can get exhausted, and you can be discouraged in your soul winning. Jesus himself said in Matthew 9 verses 37 and 38, "The harvest indeed is plenteous, but the laborers are few." And not a lot of people wanting to do soul winning anymore. And it never has been a large number, but it's now hard to find somebody that's willing to do it now. At all. It's getting harder. The laborers are few. Galatians 6 and verse 9, "Don't be weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you faint not." The problem is you get weary being the only one that does it, or the only ones. In a congregation, the average number is somewhere between 3 and 6% do the evangelism. Think about that. You'll know about how many will do it. But that isn't how many are doing it, it's how many willing to do it. So a barrier to greater soul winning is just stressful services. They're already doing so much. They're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing the other. They're wore out. A second one is satanic storms. And that satanical storms, I'm not kidding about that. Look at this, and something that I began to realize. Look at verse 36 beginning. "Now when they had left the multitude, they took him alone in the boat as he was, And there were other little boats with them as well. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. So it wasn't just beating on the boat, it's beating into the boat. Verse 38, but he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. I'm assuming, with it doing like that, there must have been some kind of cabin or something on top of it. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Boat sinking. Verse 39, then he arose, and listen to what he did. He rebuked the wind. Ever paid attention to that? He rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. So he said something different to the sea than he said to the wind. He said to the wind something that rebuked it. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceeding and said to one another. So they went from fearing the storm to fearing Jesus. Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? In Psalm 107 verse 29 it says, He calms the storm so that its waves are still. In Ephesians 2 and verse 2, something interesting here. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, all right, he's the Son of God, right? Right? He's got all power in heaven and on earth, right? Right. Why would a storm threaten him? How? Why would it? Not how. Why would it? If all elements are subject to the Lord, why would there be a storm? Why? Ephesians 2 verse 2 says that the devil is the prince and the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. Is there something to that? Interesting. Job 1 and verse 19 says, A great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the house, the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. Who was in charge when that happened? The devil had been given that authority at that moment. In Acts 27 verse 4, when they were trying to make their trip to Rome, it says, and the winds were contrary. What I'm suggesting to you is that this storm was not sent from God. He wouldn't have rebuked it had it been from God. It's from somewhere else. Now, storms and shipwrecks, folks, can discourage your soul winning. And by that, what I mean is, in Acts 27, you know that long story of Paul, weeks on the ship, and then finally it crashes, and they all have to jump out and swim to the shore to survive a shipwreck. But 2 Corinthians 11, verse 25, Paul says, 3 times I've been shipwrecked, and a night and a day I've spent in the sea. That's a long time to be in the ocean. And by the way, the last thing you want to be is bobbing around in the ocean on a moonlit night with sharks in the water. You just look like supper. And that's where my point is though storms, terrible storms can come up in your life. Terrible things can happen. If you're trying to soul win and things are going wrong in your life, it's hard to get up the energy to want to reach out to somebody. Just saying the way it is. And that's what Jesus is still doing. So a barrier to greater soul winning is satanical storms. And then the next one I want you to see, and you'll see those, by the way, if you start soul winning. And then there's societal suspicions. In Mark chapter 5 and verse 1, then they came to the other side. I think there's a significance to the term, the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. In Mark 4 and verse 35 it says, on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, let's cross over to the other side. I don't think he's just talking about the other side of the lake. He's talking about another group of people and another way of living over there. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 24 and 25, you might want to look at this one just in case you don't believe what I'm talking about. Matthew chapter 4, 24 and 25, it says, then his fame went throughout all Syria. Were Jews living in Syria? There might have been a few, but all Syria wasn't. And they, that is the Syrian people, that's right. Who would they be? We call them Gentiles. Okay? And they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. Now, I'm just reading the antecedent. It's Syrians. You don't hear that very often, do you? You had that discussed? Verse 25 of that same says, great multitudes followed him from Galilee, okay, and we all know that the Galileans were more Greek-speaking, so they're kind of Hellenistic-type Jews, and from Decapolis. Now, Decapolis is the area we're talking about that he crossed over to. Now, Decapolis, it's Deca, meaning 10. There's 10 cities, Decapolis. That's the meaning of the word. And then he says Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond Jordan. So Decapolis, which is beyond Jordan, and other cities on the other side of Jordan. Those would have been less Semitic, right? Follow with me. John chapter 12, verses 20 through 21 says that there were Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast and asked, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." So it's not the first time Gentiles or Greek-speaking Jews or kind of Hellenistic Jews, at least, if not half Jew, half Gentiles, had come after Jesus. And of course, the Samaritan woman was not exactly the kosher Jewish person. Now, the Gadarenes is the area he goes to, or the Gergesenes, depending on your version. One will say one will say the other. The meaning of Gergesenes is those who come from a pilgrimage or a fight. So it can be someone who's just traveled a long way on a pilgrimage, or you came from a fight, which is the same thing as we call a refugee. So apparently a lot of the people who lived on the other side of the lake were refugees from various situations, weren't really accepted anywhere. Gerges, or Gerasa, and Garda were cities to the east of the Sea of Galilee, and they were both Gentile cities predominantly, filled with citizens who were culturally more Greek than they were Semitic. So they weren't really that close related to the Jews. Decapolis was an informal group of Greco-Roman cities south of the ancient city of Caesarea Philippi, which we know about where he said, "On this rock." This would account for the pigs, right? It accounts for the pigs being raised. Gerasa and Garda are the modern towns that are known as Jerash and Qais. But they were made up of several cities. There's Hippos, Gerasa, Garda, and several other little cities made up the Decapolis. The point is that he went over to the other side. Interesting, hey? But societal suspicions make that difficult, and you'll see they made it difficult on him. He ends up having to leave the area pretty quickly. So they felt toward him the way they felt, they felt toward them. So there's spiritual, there's cultural, there's racial bias that can discourage soul winners, because if you're only going to reach out to those you look just exactly alike and think just exactly alike, then you're probably only going to reach out to the people in your Bible class. You know, if you want to reach other people, you got to be willing to cross the street a little bit. In Acts 28, verses 3 to 6, after they land, after that shipwreck, they see Paul gathering wood, and what happens? Snake bites him. And they say, "Oh, well, he really is a bad man, because not only did he nearly get drowned in a shipwreck, but now snakes bit him. And then he didn't get sick or swell up, and now they say, oh, he's a god." But neither one of them was true. And he ends up, though, healing someone and leading people more to Christ. So, you know, he was able to do it even in a bad situation, even when they had bias against him already. So you can cross barriers, and you can be successful, but you got to work at it. And a barrier to greater soul winning is societal suspicions. There's suspicions. If you're not in my group, I'm suspicious of you. You can still get beyond that. The next one I want you to see is spiritual strangeness confronting his mission. If you're in chapter 5, I'm going to pick up in verse 2. "And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit." We'd say a crazy person. Verse 3, "who had his dwelling among the tombs." You ever known anybody do that? Seen a few people do that before. And no one could bind him, not even with chains. I knew a guy named Obadiah. You couldn't even hold him with handcuffs or leggings. He'd break them. And he was crazy. 4, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. I don't know how you tame a man. Verse 5. Of course, women try to do that. Verse 5. That was a joke, ladies. Don't get tense. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. So cutting is not a new thing, young people. Okay, but it's not a good sign. Verse 6, when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. Now, isn't that strange? So all this is just weird, isn't it? It's all weird. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with you? So he didn't do this. What have I, you know, it's like scary even. What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. Verse 13, and at once Jesus gave them permission. He's talking about casting into the swine. And then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine, and there were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down a steep place in the sea and drowned in the sea. That's just weird. Isn't that just that's just a strange part of the story. Verse 15, then they came to Jesus and saw the one that had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting, clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. It was weird. It was strange. Have you seen any strange stuff? Some people won't do evangelism because they can't handle the strange. Let me tell you something. You do evangelism, you're going to see strange. Luke 8 and verse 27, it says, he wore no clothes. When the guy I told you broke the chains, Obadiah, when he wasn't trying to kill you, he was, when he broke the chains, he was always naked. I don't know what that was, but he quotes scriptures and sing gospel hymns, walk down the middle of the street naked. Interesting character. Matthew 8 and verse 28, they met him 2 demon-possessed men. Wait a minute, I thought there was one. Or is it 2? Well, it could be that one was more dominant than the other one was quiet. Or it could be he's talking about a literally split person. And something really scary. Scarier than any normal weird. Weirder than weird. Like there were actually 2 people, maybe one like possessed and one not. Have you been around anybody that just almost scared you? You've been around, I'm talking about crazy scared. You ever seen anybody on PCP? Or something like that, when it was just scary. I spent several hours one night with this woman. That scared me to death. All right. Matthew 8:28, exceeding fierce, so that no one could pass that way. You ever had anybody, just threaten you? If you're going to do some soul winning, somebody's liable to threaten you. I mean, have a broken bottle waved in your face. They're probably not going to hurt you, but you might be threatened. 1 Peter, I've had that done. 1 Peter 4, verse 12. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you as though some strange thing happened to you. These are strange events, but that you go through it is not strange. You follow me? There are a lot of strange things in this world, but that you go through it because you're doing evangelism out there is not a strange thing. It's to be expected. You should expect it. In Acts 19, there's this story about them bringing all their witchcraft books in, and thousands, I guess, dollars, then they burned them. And you say, well, there's no such thing as witchcraft. Don't say that around a witch. So I'm just telling you that there's some people out there, I'm telling you there's folks out there I'm scared of, but not to teach the gospel. I mean, there are people who do witchcraft kind of stuff. I'm not saying they twinkle their nose, and do funny things, stop the camera. I'm saying they're spooky and scary, and they will kill people even. Strange barriers and old hindrances and odd things may discourage soul winners. But in Acts 16, 6 and 7, here's something you need to remember. Even the Lord sometimes does some strange things with us. For example, in Acts 16, 7, why would the Lord tell somebody not to go somewhere? Why would he hinder Paul from going here? Why would he hinder him from going to there? You would think that the Lord would want everybody to go everywhere. But apparently sometimes even strange things happen about doors that are closed, that the place could be forbidden for you to even go there. So a barrier to greater soul winning is spiritual strangeness, and some people will see that and they'll say, well, I'm not doing any more of that evangelism stuff. I'm done. Let me go to the next one. So, and that's sensational success. Believe it or not, success can be a real demotivator. In Mark chapter 5, look at verse 18 through 20. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. Now, that, to me, you almost feel sorry for the guy. He's begging Jesus to let him go. And Jesus says, no, not going with me. Well, remember, he is a Gentile. It probably wouldn't have worked anyway. More than likely a Gentile, or at least part Gentile. Verse 19, however, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord had done for you and how he had compassion on you. Did he do that? Verse 20, and he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis, that's those 10 cities, all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. So everybody knew the reputation, knew what he had done, and saw that he's normal now, and they were all amazed. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 25 it says, a great multitude, I referenced this a moment ago, great multitude followed him from Galilee, from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. That was before our text basically, but now in Mark 7 and verse 37, after our text, it says, and again departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the sea. So there was something had changed because they didn't want him to come back. And now they were receiving him back into Decapolis. Mark 8 and verse 1 also says, in those days the multitude being very great. This appears to be, while he's still on the seaside, on the side of Decapolis, the crowd got to be great. Now, maybe everybody doesn't understand this, but Mark 8 and verse 9, the feeding of the 4,000 appears to happen over there. So he had had some success with his telling his story. Now others seem to often maybe have more success than you. I mean, so you're doing soul winning. One of the things that can really discourage you as a soul winner is someone else having great success and you not having great success. Someone else winning souls and you not winning souls. Somebody else accomplishing something. That can be very discouraging at times. But I think it needs to be more encouraging than discouraging. It's like in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 2 when he says that Macedonia had already gotten all their money together. They were ready like a year ago. And I bragged on you to them. So, I mean, really, you need to understand that we're counting on you to get this done. So I actually think, yeah, a minority will not do, but the majority will do better when they've heard other great stories of when people have been successful. But some won't. They'll do worse. Somebody else has great success. They win 2 or 3 people, and they say, well, I've never won anybody. I've heard people say that. I've been studying with people for years, and I've never once baptized anybody. I've never once studied with anybody. And oh, so-and-so over there, he's just studied and taught. It can discourage you. So a barrier to greater soul winning is sensational success. Those are the lessons I'm basically through. Not every version of the Scriptures is best. I'm not advocating reading and studying and saying every version of the Bible is great. I wouldn't say that. But a poor version of the Scriptures that is read is better than a great version that's not read. So not every method of soul winning is best. I agree. I heard of this barber who came to the Lord and at some revival. And the next morning he was so excited he went into work and he wanted to share his face so bad. He was so excited, but he didn't know how to do it, and he'd never done it before. And he had a guy in the chair in front of him about to shave, and he put the razor down at his neck, and he said, are you prepared to meet God? So I don't think every method of soul winning is best. So not every method of soul winning is best, but a poor method of soul winning that is used is better than a great method of soul winning that is not used. And so that's even the reason we want to improve the class, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep doing some of what we're doing. So a missionary to Africa, and this kind of summarizes the concept, a missionary to Africa told the story of an elderly woman who wanted to reach out with the gospel to others. She just happened to be blind. She's not only blind, she couldn't read and she couldn't write. Now, you want to win souls, you're blind, you can't read, and you can't write. How in the world are you going to win anybody that way? Well, what she did, she went to the missionary and she asked for a copy of the Bible in French. And after she got that, she asked the missionary to underline a few scriptures, John 3:16, and some other scriptures, and to mark the pages so that she could find them even though she were blind. Okay? And then the minister was kind of like, I want to see what she's doing. So he followed her. And she went down to the local boys' school. It was an all-boys school, sat outside until the school let out. And when it let out, one of the boys coming by, she asked, can any of y'all read French? And so one of the boys said, well, I can. And so she said, would you read this to me? And so he read that to her. He says, do you know what it means? And whatever he said, she took that and spoke to him about Jesus and what it meant to be a Christian. 24 young men, over the process of time, became believers in Christ. Blind, can't read, can't write, but won somebody. A bad version is better than no version, wouldn't you say? I think one of the greatest barriers to soul winning is just not doing it. Do you have anyone that you know that you could invite to church? Come on. When's the last time you did that? Do you have anybody that you know that maybe their kids could go to FCA? Do you have anybody that you know that you could invite to a Bible class here at church, Sunday school? Do you have anybody that you know that you could invite to study with you personally? Do you have anybody? We can become so lackadaisical about this that nobody gets one. So what of you? Are you going to reach out to anyone? Am I going to reach out to anyone? Or are we just going to keep talking about it? Is evangelism something we talk about and never do? I hope it's something we do and talk about less. So if you're here tonight and you've never obeyed the gospel, that's what the point of our evangelism is. We want you to believe in Jesus Christ, believe that He is the risen Son of God, to confess that faith, to repent of your sins and turn your life around, let Him be Lord of your life, and then to be baptized and begin that new walk after having your sins forgiven, washed away by the blood of the Lamb. That's what we want for you. We need to be busy about sharing that truth with everybody. If you need to come, though, come right now as we stand and as we sing.